minute face-to-face huddles with the candidate at a downtown hotel. The candidate also reportedly called Chris Christie today, said to be a finalist as well. If you're at all confused about where Trump stands on this decision, don't worry. The candidate cleared it up today in an interview with Bret Baier of Fox News.
The level of receptivity that I've had here is incredible, and the governor's been amazing. So we'll see what happens. Newt Gingrich is coming in today to see me here, who has, by the way,
down to 2.
No, I tell you, Chris Christie is somebody I've liked a long time. He's a total professional. He's a good guy, by the way. A lot of people don't understand that, but I'm narrowing it down. I mean, I'm at 3, potentially 4, but in my own mind, I probably am thinking about 2.
So, John, I've been on the ground all day trying to follow the bouncing ball from Indianapolis, from where you are in Cleveland, where whoever Trump picks will accept the nomination next week, probably. Yeah. Where does the running mate search stand?
Well, I think funnily enough, after all the drama of today with the Pence morning, where we all thought, wow, maybe Pence is just the guy, then we learned that Sessions and Gingrich were also on the way to Indiana. That the family had met with Christie earlier, that Christie was on the phone with Trump today. I think we are not that far from where we were 24 hours ago when we talked about it on this show, which is to say, I believe we have a short list now, and the short list is 3 people: Gingrich, Christie, Pence, and maybe Sessions, but it doesn't seem like there's much to go on there, even though he's there with you in Indiana. So we got a short list of 3, and Trump doing final gut checks here on who he actually wants to run with.
I think Sessions is being done at this point largely as a courtesy. I think the other 3 are somewhat in play. The thing I've been saying for the last 24 hours I think is still true, and a number of Trump aides who've heard me say it on television has said, attaboy, you're right on this. If he goes with his head, if he goes with the safe thing, the thing that would unite the conservative movement, the thing that would allow him to be at the top of the ticket and not have risk a running mate who would cause distractions, he'll go with Governor Pence. If, however, he goes with the people he still feels more comfortable with, even after this time with Pence, he'll go with either Gingrich or Christie. One thing we don't know is the vetting issues and whether he's shying away from either Christie or Gingrich, both of whom have known things in their dossiers that could be distractions.
Right.
So both those guys can cause distractions either by what they say once they were picked or by their backgrounds, and we just don't know how heavily Trump is weighing that. We do know that the balance of recommendation to him amongst people around him is weighted more towards Pence than the other 2.
Right. There's some sense in particular that Paul Manafort likes the idea of Pence, and we've discussed already what the assets here are. Trump still needing to consolidate support among Republicans, still having some problems doing that with conservatives. Pence giving him a good card to play with conservatives and building up some bona fides there. Paul Ryan today made a comment about how he'd like to be reassured that Trump is a genuine conservative. So you can see the argument there for Pence. But in the end, as you know, Mark, the question of, a candidate, a nominee, looking into the eyes of the people who he would not just be putting on the ticket as a cohort on the road and in a campaign setting, but also who they would like to govern with if they become president of the United States is a huge thing. That gut check really matters, and maybe for Trump more than others. He doesn't seem like a guy who's afraid of distractions to me on the basis of how he's campaigned so far. So maybe the distraction factor won't matter so much, and he'll end up just saying, screw it, I want to be with Christie, I want to be with Gingrich. They're more my kinds of guys.
I think he likes his own distractions, maybe not that of others. This does show the closeness he has to his family, the very public way in which his family is involved in this decision. It's something I've never seen at this level.
Right. All right. New details are out at this hour about the lineup at the upcoming Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. Elizabeth Warren, Michelle Obama, Bernie Sanders, all expected to speak on Monday night, the first night of the convention. 2 nights later, President Obama will take the stage. That is all we know, but amazingly, it's a hell of a lot more than we know about the Republican convention, which starts here in Cleveland in just 5 days. Reports are that family will play a big role and that Ted Cruz, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, and Scott Walker will all be speaking. But after nearly a week of daily promises that the full convention schedule will be released, we ain't got it. And this comes amid widespread concerns about the lack of organization, logistics, and security to deal with tens of thousands of demonstrators on the streets of Cleveland. So, Mark, considering all of this, how likely do you think it is that the Republican National Convention is going to be a total fustercluck?
Well, look, they are well behind in terms of what they said publicly and according to our reporting, what's going on behind the scenes and slotting a convention that begins in just a few days. On the other hand, this is an area where I think Trump can, and the Trump operation can kind of defy gravity. As long as they fill the time on the stage, as long as stuff happens every day that feeds the beast, that keeps the action moving in the room, they'll be okay. And it's, you know, it's not that much programming. It's not 24 hours of programming, but it is a high wire thing here, and they are a little bit in danger of falling off the wire.
Yes, and look, the big caveat, and I don't think you're going to disagree with me when I say this, the big caveat here are the security issues and what happens on the streets of Cleveland, because given what has happened in America over the course of the last week, images of chaos, images of disorder, images that could get worse than just chaos and disorder, that could involve violence, those kinds of images could quickly overwhelm anything going on the convention stage over the course of the next week. And if that happens, this could really be a mess, not just in terms of the television production, but politically for Donald Trump and his chances to become the next president of the United States.
You know, there's not much they can do about that. Look, if they had more time and there was more bandwidth amongst the high command, who's spending an extraordinary amount of time now, obviously, on this running mate search, they could be coordinating with the Secret Service and local police in a way that might give people more confidence. But just go back to the schedule inside the hall. You know, picking the speakers is the first step. You got to then figure out what order people are speaking in. You got to coordinate their presentations. You don't want another Clint Eastwood situation. So they're taking a risk here. But as I said, this is an area where Trump's showmanship and his family may be able to paper over what could be, for a normal campaign, an existential crisis. Moving on now, almost a week after the Dallas shootings that killed 5 police officers, Hillary Clinton invoked Abraham Lincoln's famous House Divided speech today with her own plea for national unity in remarks at the old Illinois state capitol earlier today. Her speech, which came a day after President Obama and President Bush spoke at that memorial service for the Dallas officers, urged Americans to appreciate the difficult work that police do, and also called for, quote, ending the systematic racism that plagues our country. Then, just after Clinton pleaded guilty for sometimes stoking political tensions on the campaign trail herself, she took aim at her general election opponent.
As someone in the middle of a hotly fought political campaign, I cannot stand here and claim that my words and actions haven't sometimes fueled the partisanship that often stands in the way of progress. So I recognize I have to do better too. In times like these, we need a president who can help pull us together, not split us apart. And that is why I believe Donald Trump is so dangerous. He says that if he doesn't win in November, we, and again I quote, won't even have a country anymore. America is not going to continue to survive. I do not know what he's talking about. This man is the nominee of the party of Lincoln. We are watching it become the party of Trump. And that's not just a huge loss for our democracy. It is a threat to it.
Sean, the Clinton campaign painted these in advance as major remarks. Clinton's first speaking since Donald Trump declared himself a couple days running now as the law and order candidate. So in the ongoing story about how both candidates have responded to last week's shooting, how did Clinton do?
Well, look, what she is trying to do, it seems pretty clear, is to be the candidate. If there's an optimistic candidate and a pessimistic candidate, she wants to be the candidate of optimism, guarded optimism, realistic optimism, but optimism. And she wants to paint Trump as both a divider and also someone who traffics in the kind of apocalyptic rhetoric that has sometimes is appealing to certain segments of the electorate, but in the end does not generally, and in fact I can't think of a time it ever has, won a general election. She's trying to put herself on the side of light and him on the side of dark. I think she framed it relatively well from her point of view politically today. Doesn't mean that Trump's message isn't still powerful, but she's staking out some pretty clear ground.
You know, people talk all the time about how Trump won't acknowledge any mistakes and error, and Clinton's not too far off that. You know, she said her emails were a mistake, but she didn't really say what about it was a mistake. Right. For her to say today, in I thought a heartfelt way, but also a shrewd, tactical way, that she's been part of, dialogue that might be considered divisive. I think that's smart. I think that her argument in the end about Trump is he's unreasonable and I'm reasonable. And I think that was a pretty big concession to make. Let's see, though, if she can keep this tone up. If this is a one-off, given the Veepstakes and everything else that's going on, I'm not sure this speech will break through for very many voters, again, unless she sustains the tone and the ideas in other high-profile venues.
Look, I got to say, you can't really know the answer to this question in advance, but right now, especially just still less than a week away from all the stuff that happened last week in Baton Rouge and Minneapolis and then in Dallas, I just sense there are a lot of people in the country who want a unifying figure, not a divisive figure, and that Hillary Clinton's betting that she can be the unifier in contrast to Trump. All right, when we come back, Donald Trump and his picking up momentum in battleground state polls, the what, where, why, and how of all that right after this. Welcome back. We saw a battleground state poll tsunami today that tells a fairly consistent story. Donald Trump gaining ground on Hillary Clinton in those battleground states. New NBC, Wall Street Journal, Marist surveys show Trump tied with Clinton in Ohio, where he trailed her by 6 points a couple of months ago. Clinton is still ahead in states like Colorado, where a Monmouth poll has her up by 13, and Wisconsin, where a Marquette poll has her up by 6. But Trump has closed the gap in other states, including the key battleground state of Florida, where Quinnipiac University poll has him ahead 42 to 39%. That is an 11-point swing in Trump's direction from less than a month ago. Yesterday, we told you about a Bloomberg Politics Slice poll that showed Clinton with a big lead among college-educated voters, something that doesn't usually happen for Democrats. So, Mark, just looking at all these polls, ours from yesterday and the ones that have come out today, what are the realities and implications that you see of these numbers?
Well, look, people are going to have to get used to there being a difference between the national polls and the state polls for a variety of reasons. I think that the reality of the existence of these polls is it's great for Trump on the eve of the convention. It allows him to feel like he's got momentum and argue to the delegates where there might be some wavering. This is a guy who can win 270 electoral votes, so get in line. And I think for the Clinton folks, they're not happy about it on one level. On another level, They continue to believe that their biggest challenge is getting Democrats, donors, activists, volunteers to believe this is a losable race and to be energized in the way they're going to need them to be in order to make it a winnable race.
Yeah, look, the other reality here seems to be, in the case of many of these polls, possibly all, they were conducted in the wake of the Comey ruling last week that they was not going to recommend any kind of charges against her over the email controversy, and then took her to the woodshed even as he let her off the hook. And it seems as though, for some number of voters, Comey's criticisms of Clinton have sunk in, because you can see that in all of these states, or virtually all of them, Trump has gained some ground. That's the big takeaway here in these battleground states, and that it seems to have, we can't tell causation, but at least in terms of timing, it seems as though the Comey decision, although sparing her from the existential threat of prosecution, may have taken some, at least temporary, toll on her poll standing.
Yeah. And it does show, again, the causality. There's just no way to unpack it. But if it is true that these polls represent an accurate notion that Trump's doing better, and if it's the case that the Comey thing was a factor, which probably was, then you have to say the press maybe overemphasized Trump's failure in his speeches to take advantage of the Comey thing. The Comey thing may have happened all on its own, and Trump's instincts were correct. He didn't need to talk as much about it as his critics said he did in order for it to have an impact on the voters.
Well, of course, on the other hand, you could argue that if he had made a consistent talking point out of it and had driven the message, he would have gotten even more of a bounce out of these polls. So
you could argue that. You could argue that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Now to that spat ongoing between Donald Trump and Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It continues to gain steam. It's been a few days since Justice Ginsburg told the Associated Press and later the New York Times that she didn't want to even think about the possibility of Trump in the White House, talked about maybe moving overseas. On Monday, she told CNN legal analyst Joan Biskupic that Trump was, quote, a faker, and called him out for not releasing his tax returns. Trump, like many Republicans, including Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, called those comments inappropriate. But only the Republican frontrunner went as far as to send a midnight tweet about this matter, saying, quote, Justice Ginsburg of the U.S. Supreme Court has embarrassed all while making very dumb political statements about me. Her mind is shot. Resign. John, is it a good idea for Trump to pick this fight with the notorious RBG?
Well, I think we can probably agree. I actually don't know whether we agree, but I think we might, that it was really unusual for Ginsburg to do what she did, and I think probably inappropriate. I don't think it's a good idea.
Definitely inappropriate. Definitely inappropriate. Repudiated by some Democrats in this partisan period. That's extraordinary. Yeah. And if a Republican justice did that to a Democratic candidate, I think the world would explode.
If you let me finish. Yeah, if you let me finish what I was going to say exactly the same thing you were. So we're on the same page about that. But the question is whether Trump gets much benefit out of attacking Ginsburg in the way that he's attacking her. Again, it's one of these things where I think if Trump in a sober way were to call attention and say what you just said and I just said, everyone in the world, not everyone in the world, everyone in the world who's not hopelessly partisan would say, Donald Trump has a point there. But then to say that Ginsburg has lost her mind, that's, I think, a little bit. It's like a child, kids fighting on a schoolyard, and it kind of plays into the notion that Trump's temperament may not be that great. Again, he could do it. He could make the same point without having to attack her personally.
But if you're from the school of thought that says a lot of what this election is going to be about is using the court to energize your base, I think it's good for Trump to do it this way, because he just wants to get the personalized the notion that the liberals on the Supreme Court need to be replaced by conservatives, and this is going to get attention. It's very hard. Both sides always try to make the court an issue. It's very hard to do. This allows him to glom onto it. Again, probably not appealing to that many people in the center, but he does have some people on the left criticizing Ginsburg, and I think that helps his cause no matter how he takes it up.
I do think we should just note it's an incredible fight. Something we've never seen before. Amazing, this back and forth between Ginsburg and Trump. Just amazing. All right, up next, we have two all-star Democratic strategic masterminds, James Ragin Cajun Carville and Anita, I don't know what her nickname is, but Anita Dunn. She's awesome. They're joining us right after these words from our sponsors.
With us now from Chicago, Democratic strategist James Carville, and from Gotham City, Barack Obama's former White House communications director, Anita Dunn. Thank you both for joining us. Anita, start with you. We want to run through the people we think are on Trump's final list here for potential Veeps. Just tell us the good and the bad, in short, of what you think about each prospect, starting first with Anita. What do you think of the prospect of Trump picking Mike Pence?
Well, I think it could certainly help him carry Indiana, perhaps, which, that's the good, right? He's not exciting. He's not, he's not dynamic, and he has some real negatives from his time as governor. So,
James, what do you think of Pence as a choice for Trump?
I think it'll help the Democrats carry Indiana. He can't win the governorship. How are you going to help Trump win anything?
All right, so you're both pretty bullish on Pence.
My money is
true.
on Pence.
He can't win the governor's race. How's he going to help win? How's he going to help win the presidency?
All right, so you guys think Pence is a bad idea. Anita, give me your sense of whether you think Christie would be a good running mate for Donald Trump.
Christie's a good running mate for Donald Trump if the only thing he ever had to do in the campaign is to go debate whoever the Democrats nominate. He'd probably do pretty well. Unfortunately, he brings his record, he brings his vet, and he brings his personality with him. So I think that outweighs his performance in debates.
All right, James, do you think that's right? I mean, it seems to me the debate's a pretty big deal for a running mate.
It's something. And I mean, he crushed Marco Rubio. It was one of the most compelling moments in history of presidential debates. But there's a lot of downside to go with some potential upside, and that assumes that the Democratic vice presidential nominee can't get ready for a debate, which is a pretty big assumption.
It's scaring me that James and I are agreeing this much. So
far, James, you've had a decade-long relationship with your friend Newt Gingrich. I'm wondering, having rejected the first two options, whether you think Gingrich is a better choice than the other two for Trump.
Look, if you took the combined approval ratings in each of their states, Georgia, New Jersey, and Indiana, I don't think it'd add up to 75. And, the Republicans, there was an article in the Times today about the deep bench and the talent and how multi-ethnic the party, leaders was and how young. And, I mean, I think this is a reflection of a deeper problem that they have. But, Gingrich is aggressive guy, and I guess Trump thinks he could attack Hillary and give him some slack to do other things. That's what I can think of.
It's interesting because they actually did have a number of really good potential choices who either announced very early they had no intention of running with Trump, or who Trump has insulted. Susana Martinez, for example, he called her the worst governor in the country, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that Gingrich temperamentally is obviously someone Trump is very comfortable with. We do think that's important. I think it's important. But, nothing says future like somebody who was Speaker in 1995. So.
Right. I'm going to guess that
First Lady then.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess that neither one of you guys think that. I'm going to guess that neither one of you think Jeff Sessions would be. I'm going to guess that neither one of you think Jeff Sessions would be a particularly stronger choice than either of the first three we talked about.
I'm not sure what Jeff Sessions brings to the ticket besides Trump's ability to say that he has somebody in Washington who potentially could help him with the legislature. I'm not sure that would stand up to scrutiny, but certainly Judge Sessions, Senator Sessions, is someone that, Trump seems comfortable with as well. He's very partisan. He's from a deep South state that is not going to be competitive. So again, he gives him the ability to say he picks somebody.
Yeah, I just think if you look at the people that they're talking about compared to what we're talking about at the beginning of the Republican Party, if I'm a Republican, I have to be sick about this selection, the choices I have for vice president right now, as I would be for president. But I kind of think that's obvious.
Okay, more with the country duo of Carville and Dunn right after this. Stay tuned. Back in just a moment. Back now with the two Democratic strategists, James Carville and Anita Dunn, who's a former White House communications director for President Obama. Guys, last segment we talked about Trump's Veep options. Let's talk about Hillary Clinton's. The kind of conventional wisdom remains Tim Kaine's to lose. Leave Tim Kaine aside for a second. Anita, you first. What's another name either out there or should be out there that you think would be a good alternative to Kaine if she decides against him?
Well, I've always been a fan of Elizabeth Warren being on this ticket. I think the excitement of having two women, but also Elizabeth Warren, who is a great campaigner and who really connects extremely well with voters who are concerned about economic inequality. I think it would be a great ticket.
James, what's a name you like?
Well, I would love an Elizabeth Warren Chris Christie debate. That'd be something I would really love to see. Look, I love Governor Kaine. Elizabeth Warren, terrific. Sherwood Brown, Tom Vilsack, the Castros. I think she's going. I don't think we're going to know. My guess is, knowing her, she's going to be very deliberate, listen to everybody, read everything, and make up her mind somewhat later. But it's going to be pretty hard for her to go wrong. But I'm like, for Elizabeth, if he picks Chris Christie, please pick Elizabeth Warren. But that vice presidential debate would be one for the ages.
James, let me just stay with you. If you're thinking about the running mate selection as trying to address a political problem or a vulnerability, what's the main political vulnerability that Clinton needs to solve with her running mate selection?
Well, I think if you look at the polls and across the board, that she's got to show that she's in it for people as opposed to herself. That she has a larger motivation, which I obviously think that she does. And I think Warren would have some strengths there. But you got a lot of college-educated Republicans that are very, very trepidatious about voting for Trump. So she might want to go in a different direction. I think this admiral they were vetting up at Tufts is a kind of interesting thing. I don't know if that's a false flag operation or whatever it is, but I wouldn't put something like that past her. At least she'd give it a lot of consideration. I happen to think, as Mark knows, that the Democratic coalition in the presidential year is sufficiently ascendant that if you unify it, it's pretty hard to lose a general election. So if she can do that with any of these picks, I think she'll be fine.
Anita, what's your thought about that same question? What problem is she trying to solve, or does she need to solve?
Well, she doesn't need to solve anywhere near the number of problems Donald Trump does, who needs to solve for experience, ability to get things done in Washington, foreign policy knowledge, and basic temperament and qualifications to be president, all of which I think are unsolvable by his vice president. For Secretary Clinton, she could go with a candidate who's a younger generation, who could really send a message about the future and also stronger together, diversity. Or, as James said, she could look to somebody who can help communicate that she really does care about people, which I, like James, believe she does. And that is somebody in the economic sphere, as Sherrod Brown, Elizabeth Warren. Tim Kaine is a terrific guy, a great campaigner, fluent in Spanish, was in the Peace Corps, has the kind of experience and qualifications that people look for, and he would be additive as well to the ticket. At the end of the day, though, it's who does she think should be the vice president based on her knowledge and her belief of who would make a good president. She'll make a good choice.
James, are you giving advice directly or indirectly to Hillary Clinton these days?
Well, I'm always giving indirect advice to anybody all the time. But I think she's pretty set on going through each thing, and I just know her. And I know she's going to go through this, and I think she's pretty much going to be, she'll listen to anything anybody has to say. The one thing that I do think that she needs, having run against both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, they've got a little bit more on the status quo side than I think she really is, because how can you be more changed than Donald Trump to some extent? So I think a vice presidential nominee that would send a signal that there's some change coming, I think would be very helpful. And, I don't know how that plays out, but I think it's something they should consider.
Anita, you talked to a lot of Democrats, these battleground state polls, which John and I talked about earlier in the program, and the Comey announcement and other things. What's your overview of how Democrats are feeling about the prospect of possibly losing to Trump in this race?
Well, I think polls that are done in July after you've had a significant news event that was negative are, not exactly polls that are predictive of what's going to happen in November. There's a lot of campaign between now and then. And, Trump was artificially low at the end of June based on possibly the worst month of campaigning in the history of modern presidential campaigns.
Anita, I'm sorry. What I'm asking is, are people worried in the Democratic Party now or no?
No, I don't think people are worried. I think that they understand it's going to be a close race, that we have to go out and win it, that we shouldn't be complacent. We shouldn't take it for granted. I think Democrats sometimes look at Trump and they think, how could that guy ever win? And there's a complacency that we should worry about. These polls maybe are a bit of a wake-up call. It's a tough race out there, but I don't think people are worried. I think they look at her and they see somebody who can, win the debates, have a great convention, and basically, head-on-head against Donald Trump, she's going to win.
James, in the wake of last week, in the wake of Louisiana, I know you're really familiar with that state, Minnesota and Dallas, and all the horrors of last week. Trump is right now playing the law and order card. Sounds a lot like Nixon in 1968. Is that smart politically for him, and is that something Hillary Clinton's going to have to counter more directly?
Now I was reading right before I came on here that he was saying that there were people calling for a moment of silence for that horrific shooter in Dallas, and of course no one can find any such thing. I don't think when people look, I just find it hard to believe in any sense that when people are looking for the country to unify, that are concerned about all this, that Donald Trump is the go-to person in this process. And I mean, I'm an adamant, diehard Democrat, diehard Clinton supporter, but I mean, I really mean that. I just don't see where he's playing this thing anything close to the way that the country is looking for in this. Look, is a 38% of the country I'd agree with him no matter what? Probably so, but I don't see anything that he said that would expand that 38% at all.
Anita, we got just a little bit of time left. What do you wonder about the Republican convention?
Well, I wonder, what is the narrative really going to be? Conventions are an extraordinary opportunity to really present your story the way you want it presented. And they haven't given us any indication of what that's going to be. And so it feels like one of the greatest opportunities he's ever going to have to present his story the way he wants to present it. And the question is, can they rise up to that occasion? Can they really use it the way it should be used?
Okay. Anita Dunn, James Carville, thank you both. Good to talk with you.
Thank you.
Coming up, we're going to talk about the potentially messy rules fight that looms ahead of the Republican convention in Cleveland, where John is. We'll be right back with that. And if you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can now listen to us on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM. More after this.
Republican Convention Rules Committee is scheduled to hold its first meetings here in Cleveland tomorrow, when those never-Trump delegates will try to free themselves from the shackles of voting for their party's presumptive nominee. Joining us now to talk about what could be a pretty ugly rules battle, Republican attorney and MSNBC political analyst Ben Ginsburg. Ben, good to see you. We've been talking about this, it feels like, for weeks, months, like we're finally now almost here. And it seemed like the Trump people thought they had this all under control until a couple days ago when we're starting to hear maybe they're a little worried.
So I think all of this is a moving target. I think delegates are allowed to change their minds and notoriously unreliable in terms of giving hard counts at this stage. Yeah. The nominees' whip team is right to worry always and to operate as if the worst could possibly happen. But they have a lot of tools.
Right. So if you were looking at the situation that's about to unfold over the course of the next 24, 36 hours, what are you looking for? What will you be paying attention to see, to measure how it's going?
The Rules Committee meeting tomorrow, the temporary committee of the RNC rules, will run through the whole list of them. There are a number of test rules that I suspect folks will bring up to sort of gauge strength. And then there'll ultimately be the attempt to amend the current rules to include the conscience clause or the unbinding clause.
Then what is, you know, what is propelling things in the direction at this point, to the extent things are headed in a worse direction, which some RNC officials suggest is happening?
Well, I think it's the uncertainty of things. I think probably picking the vice presidential nominee, if it's one that's reassuring to the delegates, is one of the things that can move it in the right direction. And the indecision is sort of not helping matters. The fact that there's not a convention program yet suggests in sort of a roundabout way that things are not buttoned up. So I think all those things are contributing to the uncertainty that means when you try and pin down delegates, they're perhaps not rock solid in what they're saying, or even worse, just not answering their phones.
All right. So I know this is a hard question to answer because the delegates aren't monolithic, but if you assume that the finalists for Trump's running mate are Sessions, Pence, Gingrich, and Christie, does one of those stand out to you as someone who the delegates would say, wow, that's great, Trump did a great pick, the convention's going to be all excited for Trump and for running mate X?
So I'm not certain. I mean, I think that each of them appeals to sort of a different set of the delegates. So that's why the whip counts get so sort of tentative at this point. So I think each of the four has both the strengths and weaknesses for parts of the delegate pool. Again, the way that the Republican Party picks its delegates is so state-by-state idiosyncratic that it makes figuring out which blocks there are of delegates to go whip really challenging in a situation like this.
So even if the Trump people win on the rules matters that are in play, it's also possible that a minority report could be issued out of the Rules Committee, correct?
Correct.
And that would then open up a floor debate over that minority report, correct?
It would.
So how messy could that get, even if they get over the big hurdle tomorrow in terms of not amending the rules in committee? How ugly could it be and chaotic could it be if that minority report gets out there?
Well, arguing a minority report in and of itself is not necessarily messy. I mean, it's the session runs under the rules of the House. There are minority reports all the time in the House. You put a strict time limit on it under the rules, probably 5 minutes aside. Even if the rhetoric gets particularly heated on one side or another, it's still 5 minutes and then a vote. What gets messy about it is the length of time and the roll call procedures for figuring out that vote. And it's also sort of some chum in the water for the sharks. If a minority report gets an unusually large number of votes, then there are things to do beyond the conscience clause that is going to be worrisome to I think, the Trump whip team.
Ben, much has been made about how some corporate donors are not participating in this convention. Some of your fellow Republican activists and strategists and consultants aren't coming, largely because of Donald Trump. In the end, for a viewer, for a Republican or independent around the country, is this, do you think, going to come across through media coverage and live coverage like a usual, typical Republican convention, or something different than that and maybe not as good in terms of impacting the chances of the ticket?
Well, I could speak to the visuals, and I think the visuals don't reflect anything different than what's happened in the past. The media coverage is unfortunately way beyond my control to judge what's actually written and said about that. I mean, the one part where not being there will matter is if on the presidential roll call vote, there are a lot of delegates who try and abstain and don't come into the seats. I mean, we haven't talked about that. That's not part of the conscience clause, but that's a place where you would actually see an absence of participation.
Ben, let me ask you a broader question. You participate in Republican conventions, many of them from inside the campaigns, nominees that are running them. Just from your slight outsider posture this time, just judging the whole thing, do you think that the Trump folks, the people who are running this convention, have their act together?
So I think parts of it are very much together. I believe the whip team is very together. From what I've seen in the platform committee and the RNC meeting today, it is a whip team that's acting very well and does have it together. It is unusual, as you know from your many years of covering conventions, not to have the program done, not to have announced the keynote. So that part is unusual and does not feel like other conventions.
Yeah. Okay. That seems like a very even-handed analysis by our friend Ben Ginsburg. Thank you for coming here and giving it.
Thanks.
You'll be back. Coming up, we'll be back with our reporters' notebooks here in Cleveland after this. Here with us now in Cleveland for more previewing of the Republican convention next week, Bloomberg Politics reporter Michael C. Bandura and Yamiche Alcindor of the New York Times. I think I said that right. It's great to see the two of you. Yamiche, you report about social justice and all kinds of really interesting topics that have become particularly pertinent of late. Talk a little bit about open carry and the laws that pertain in this state and what that might mean for the security situation that the Republicans are facing here.
The open carry laws in Ohio really mean that they can ban stuff like backpacks that are too big or water guns, but they cannot actually ban any handguns. They can't ban AR-15s. They can't ban any of the stuff that you can do. So anybody, especially I should say anybody coming from around the state, Ohio residents can come carrying those weapons outside, carrying them openly in a holster as long as you can see them. They don't need a permit. So basically what you could potentially see is a lot of people with a lot of guns, and they can have them out loaded or unloaded. And a lot of people are worried about that. I wrote a story about people kind of talking about the idea that after Dallas, people are really worried that they're going to add to the confusion of an already confusing Republican National Convention. Passions were already high with Donald Trump, and now you have this. So that's basically what the law is. The law is that you can have guns out and be visible.
Well, I was going to say not just confusion, but fear and paranoia. And I know some of the groups that are protesting or planning to protest have said, yeah, we're going to come packing.
There are groups. So the Oath Keepers is one of those groups. They're a group. The Southern Law Poverty Center describes them as kind of this really extremist militant right group. They say, though, that they're there to really help protect people, to help the police officers do their jobs, and to kind of basically shoot somebody if things get out of hand. I should say that there's a pro-Trump group that's having a really big celebration rally on Monday, and they're saying that they're going to be trying to ban people from carrying long arms in there. That's going to be those rifles or AR-15s. The problem is, though, that it's a little squishy. They do have a permit for the park. They can kick people out, but you can just imagine if someone has a loaded AR-15 strapped to their back and you're telling them not to be able to come into the park, it's going to be really hard.
Yeah, no kidding.
Mike Bender, just talk about your general sense of the Trump campaign's relationship now to the RNC, to the delegates in this event.
Yeah, hi, Mark. I've been talking to some delegates and some RNC members around the city who are here working on the platform committee, getting ready for rules coming up here for the RNC meeting. I'm very excited to be here in Cleveland. It's my hometown, and it's an exciting time. But I'm not getting the same sort of excitement from delegates and RNC members, particularly the folks who've been putting the platform committee together yesterday. I mean, they have no reason to believe that Trump is going to be campaigning on any of these issues that they've spent weeks and months assembling. I mean, Representative Virginia Fox from was brought to tears yesterday after putting this platform committee together, and there's just a disconnect here between the delegates and their candidate. I talked to some folks who said, we are building our platform, he's running our campaign, and that's just the way things will be. Not a lot of real excitement there. And asking them about what they like about Trump, a lot of folks say, well, he's not Clinton. I think that can be an effective political message. I'm not sure how much excitement that reflects, though.
Yeah. Yamiche, talk a little bit more about the sort of chain of command here. You've obviously got Secret Service, you've got state of law enforcement, you've got the city. Just talk about if violence does break out, if there are protests that need to be dealt with, what's your sense of who takes the lead on that and how things play out if you get people actually arrested?
My sense is that who takes the lead are the Cleveland Police Department. The Cleveland Police Department, I'm told by several sources, including a judge who's going to be holding court 20 hours a day, that he expects all the arresting documents to be filled out by Cleveland police officers. He also expects that the officers that are going to be coming from as far away as California or Florida, that they're going to be coming here and they're going to be understanding that Cleveland Police Department is the lead, that they're going to be following their procedures for mass arrests, they're going to be following their procedures for excessive force. But I should say that in this case, the police department is under a consent decree. So the Department of Justice is watching this police department because they were found to be biased and they were found to repeatedly use excessive force. So the issue is, in some ways, yes, the locals are in charge, but ultimately the DOJ is watching very closely.
Bender, I want to ask you, just because we were talking to Ben Ginsburg a second ago about delegates on the dumb Trump folks and the delegates unbound. What are they thinking right now? They think they have a chance of actually getting this done, or are they looking for some other kind of like Pyrrhic victory?
Yeah, what they're telling me is that it's mostly a Pyrrhic victory, and what they are going to count as a victory is if they can convince people the education process. They want to talk about the process, which is that the primaries should just be a data point in how they ultimately decide to vote on the floor of the convention, which is, to me, an inherent flaw in this argument. It has been from the beginning. If you're not for Trump, it seems to me like you have to be for someone, but they want to talk about the process. They want to talk about how to pull the party together, and if it leads to someone other than Trump, great. But hard to motivate a lot of folks on process, even in Cleveland.
One word answer: who's Trump going to pick?
Gingrich.
Who's Trump going to pick?
I think Gingrich too.
Okay, wow, Gingrich, two Gingriches, amazing. Michael C. Bender and Yamiche Alcindor. Thank you, and we'll be right back.
More of our coverage of the Veepstakes on both sides on BloombergPolitics.com anytime. We've also got a revised Bloomberg Politics newsletter you're going to want to subscribe to. Go to our website and you can subscribe there. Check it out. All right, coming up on Bloomberg TV, Emily Chang talks to Google Senior Policy Counsel about combating piracy. Veepstakes continue tomorrow. More from Cleveland, more on Hillary Clinton meeting with Tim Kaine. We'll have all that for you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Sayonara.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg West. Let's begin with a check of your first word news. Leadership officially changed hands today in the United Kingdom. Theresa May became Britain's second female prime minister. Queen Elizabeth invited her to form a new government. The prime minister wasted little time appointing